Okay, so welcome to another unboxing video from PicoCluster.com. So today we're going to be looking at the ODroid C2. So the ODroid is made in Korea, it'd be South Korea, and it's made by a company called Hardkernel Company Limited, apparently. And their website is hardkernel.com. And ODroid is known for making higher power SBCs, the single board computers like the Raspberry Pi. So they're pretty popular in more performance oriented applications. So lately they've been building to a smaller form factor and trying to get less expensive parts or get a lower price point to hit something closer to where the Raspberry Pi is. And so in that way I think they've been pretty successful. So first glance it looks quite a bit like a Raspberry Pi. It's actually the same physical dimensions, the mounting holes. You'll see of course the very large heatsink that's on here that covers a CPU and memory chips. So it's a little bit hard to see exactly what's going on. I'll try to find another photo and be able to put that on. So we've got HDMI again here. We've got power through the micro USB. We've got we've got 4 full-size USB ports. We've got our network port here. In this case, we are provided with gigabit networking, which a lot of cases for the Raspberry Pi doesn't matter that much, but for a lot of people, particularly what we're doing, having gigabit networking instead of 100 megabit is a really big deal. So I've read a lot of posts that talk about, these boards aren't really powerful enough to handle gigabit networking, and they definitely have a point there, but the thing is, for any networking application, it's much faster than having just 100 megabit. So on the back here we've got a couple more memory chips, and then we've got our micro SD card slot that's actually on the side. So turn it this way, it's on the side here, it's not on the back like the Raspberry Pi. And then we also have this interesting little guy here, eMMC. So this is a very fast type of compact memory, kind of a little flash card type device. It's similar to a micro SD card in sizes and capacity, but the interface is much faster. So the memory is also more expensive. Those memory cards are a lot more expensive. But so let's kind of compare it. So here's a Raspberry Pi, and you can see, the boards are very much identical, right, in size and layout. If you look at the front of them, layouts, it's virtually identical. I guess didn't notice before, but the network port is turned upside down on the ODroid versus the versus the Raspberry Pi. If we look at here, we see that the network port is actually oriented the opposite way than what it is on the Raspberry Pi. So that's kind of a little interesting deal there. So again, the ODroid comes with this big heatsink, which is very nice to have, and Raspberry Pi doesn't, but they're certainly available. And like I said, the SD card slot is on the back on the Raspberry Pi, it's on the side on the ODroid here. And then we've got the same kind of a very similar layout here on the side as far as your HDMI video and your power connector there as well. So let's talk about some of the specs, some of the other differences between these two. So Raspberry Pi comes with a gigabyte of DDR2 RAM running at 900 megahertz. The ODroid C2 comes with 2 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. I'm not sure what the speed is on that offhand, but we get double the amount of RAM, and it's faster. It's DDR3 instead of DDR2. So and in running applications, effectively that 2 gigabytes is not twice 1 gigabyte, but it's more like 3 to 4 times. because you got to remember when you boot up, you've got to load the operating system and everything else into RAM. So effectively, if you've only got 1 gigabyte of memory on a board, you've only got about half a gig or so that could be used for your applications, whereas on the ODroid, you've effectively have 1.5 gigabytes, so actually effectively 3 times more memory than just double the memory. So that's a pretty big thing. If you look at the specs on the micro SD card slots here, you'll find that the speed of the interface is faster on the ODroid, and the ODroid can accept larger memory cards, micro SD cards. The Raspberry Pi is limited to 64 gigabyte memory cards, whereas the ODroid, I believe, can accept up to 256. I know it does at least 128. And then the eMMC slot here is another nice option for faster memory. I've seen those up to 64 gigs, I think 128. I'm not sure if they get any bigger than that, but they're definitely a lot faster. So the Raspberry Pi and the Raspberry Pi 3 and the ODroid C2 actually have the same core, or the same ARM core, both an ARM A53, though on the Raspberry Pi it uses a BMC chip, and on the ODroid it's using an Amlogic chip, built that. So the Raspberry Pi is running at 1.2 gigahertz, the ODroid is running at 1.5 gigahertz, so it gives you a little bit extra speed there. And then this is running a Mali core, and the Raspberry Pi is running a video core. So I'm not sure the real speed differences between those, but they're definitely running different video cores. So they both have the USB, these are both USB 2.0. I mentioned previously in other videos that the new cores, the A53 cores in the Raspberry Pi are 64-bit capable, but they're still running a 32-bit OS. On the ODroid, it's 64-bit capable, and they're running a 64-bit OS as well. So it's only 2 gigs of RAM, but having a 64-bit CPU and OS gives some capabilities and lets you run some programs that you can't actually on the Raspberry Pi. One of the things that they have in common here is this GPIO pin header, and it's basically in the same location on both boards. I'm sure that was done very much on purpose by the ODroid guys. So it's pin compatible and even location compatible. That doesn't mean that every board will fit, or every board that fits on the Raspberry Pi will fit exactly on the ODroid, because one of the things, you've got this large heat sink here, so some of the hats that come up and go over the board may have a little bit a little bit tougher time clearing. It's probably not a problem, but there may be some additional heat generation for any hat that's on here that you don't really have with the Raspberry Pi, but that kind of depends on the board and what you're doing there. So this Gpio header that Raspberry Pi Foundation put together has essentially become an industry standard by default. So just about anybody that's making a board anymore these days has the same Gpio header. So and most of them, or if not all of them, are electrically compatible. It doesn't mean that it's software compatible. So some of the software may not, that runs on the Raspberry Pi for some of these hats and such, will run on ODroid or Pine 64 or Banana Pis or Orange Pis or any of the other boards. But at least you've got pin compatibility, electrical compatibility. So software porting becomes probably a much easier deal than that. The one last thing that I'll mention here is the video coprocessor on the ODroid is 4K capable at 60 Hertz actually. So HDMI 2.0 4K at 60 Hertz. So it supports H.265 and H.264. The Raspberry Pi is sticking right now with 1080p, which honestly is plenty for most anything anybody wants to do. And support for H.264, but certainly having a tiny board like this with very high power processing power capabilities, very low energy requirements, being able to do 4K video, I think is going to be something that's going to help usher in 4K video faster or sooner rather than later. So there you go. So the ODroid C2, very cool board, very interesting board. You're going to see we support this board fully. You're going to see a lot more benchmarks coming out. We want to see how this compares and how this goes. So the Raspberry Pi, nothing beats it as far as compatibility and industry standard. But as far as pure performance, then the ODroid C2 is definitely going to win out over your Raspberry Pi. So thanks for sticking around and watching the video. Please go on and check out the rest of the videos that we have. Thanks.